Hey guys, so as you can see by the title, today we're going to be talking about all of the best horror movies streaming on Netflix right now, and I say right now because they change their collection so frequently that by the time this video is edited and goes up and you watch it, it might have already changed. Some of these movies might not even be on there anymore. As you guys know, I did a video recently on the best horror movies streaming on Tubi, which is a free streaming site. If you haven't heard of it, go check out that video. I filmed that really recently and some of those movies are not on Tubi anymore, so that's kind of disappointing. So these things change all the time. The last Netflix video I did was on their original movies and series, which I think was 8 months ago, and that I think is still pretty accurate because they changed their original series a lot less than their normal collection. And then I did a top horror movies just like this video on Netflix over a year ago, so it's definitely time for an update. And in case you couldn't tell, it's a series. I have almost every streaming platform, so I'm going to be doing the best horror streaming on everything. You're welcome. If you want to request a streaming platform for me to talk about next, please leave a comment. Also, I need to point out that this list applies to American Netflix. I don't have access to other countries' collection on Netflix, so if you are in another country and you want to list some recommendations in the comments, please do. So before we get into the lengthy list of Netflix movies, I just want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is of course an online learning community with thousands of different types of classes, from graphic design, video editing, creative arts such as writing and drawing. Skillshare is completely ad-free, and I think it's a great way to add a little structure to our days by taking a productivity course or creative classes to help fuel our hobbies. Lately I've been really into their creative writing courses because I have recently gotten back into writing fiction, and I'm working on a project right now and I cannot wait to share it with you one day. Obviously, writing fiction, it takes a while, so you won't see it anytime soon, but I'm very excited about it and I hope you love it. So one of the classes that I'm taking on Skillshare right now is called Writing Authentic Fiction: How to Build a Believable Character by Sabah Tahir, and she's a published author herself, and she has really unique and creative ways to get to know your character better. So the first 1,000 people to click the link in my description box will get 2 months of premium membership for free. After that, it's only around $10 a month. So I do have 25 movies on this list, and it does overlap a little bit with some of the movies I talked about in my last Netflix favorite horror movies on Netflix over a year ago, but that list only had 10. So we're getting a lot more recommendations today. First up, we're going to talk about Would You Rather, which is a 2012 psychological gory horror movie, so if you're into gore, definitely watch this one. This follows Brittany Snow as she attends a dinner party where she must participate in a life-threatening game in order to help her sick brother secure an organ donor. Now, I know a lot of people love Would You Rather already, but I think not a lot of people see it as disturbing as I do, because the choices that they're given are very disturbing and, like I said, very gory. If you're into movies like Saw and you prefer a stronger plot than that, definitely watch Would You Rather. Also, I'm gonna be going through these movies kind of fast because we have 25 of them to get through, so. Next up is Green Room, which came out in 2015. This is actually an A24 movie, and I would say one of the most underrated A24 movies. It is written and directed by Jeremy Saulnier, with Anton Yelchin, Imogen Poots, and Patrick Stewart starring in it. And this follows a punk band who witness a murder at a neo-Nazi club and then are held hostage and attacked to try to cover it up. This movie is probably one of the best movies on this list that I'm gonna recommend, so if you have not seen it yet, please watch it. You're going to love it. Again, a very gory movie, a realistic type movie. There's nothing like supernatural, paranormal, anything like that. So if you prefer a more realistic, gory movie that feels like it could actually happen, Green Room's the one. Next up, we have Creep from 2014. This is one of my favorites on this list. It is just such a interesting and well done found footage movie. This stars Mark Duplass and Patrick Bryce, who also wrote the movie together, and follows a videographer hired to record an eccentric man. So they actually wrote this movie together, and as they were filming it, they were continuously revising the script. So there were many different takes of all the scenes, and all very different from each other. I think I remember reading that it was supposed to be like a comedy movie at first, so that's why there's a little bit of humor in there. I think Mark Duplass is really funny. It's a very simple found footage type movie, and anytime I get a chance to talk about it, I do, because I love this movie so much. Next up is a movie that came out, I think this year, last year. I'm getting my months mixed up, my days mixed up. Everything is just a blur right now, so I don't know. It says 2019. but it probably came out this year, I don't know. But that is Head Count. This is one that flew under the radar, I think, for a lot of people, and for good reason. It's more of an indie B movie that isn't super well done or acted. I think it was really good. Obviously, I'm recommending it to you. So this follows two brothers who befriend a group of college students as they're hiking through Joshua Tree, and they accidentally summon a shape-shifting supernatural entity. I think this is a really creative way to do a low-budget horror movie. I thought it was really effective and original, and just like I talked about when I reviewed it, I'm a little bit biased because I love Joshua Tree, so the setting obviously was great for me. But I think this is how you do a low budget B movie, indie movie smartly. And if you missed out on it, now's the time to watch it because it's on Netflix. Next up is 13 Sins, which came out in 2014, and it is an American horror remake of a Thai comedy film called 13 Beloved, and follows a desperate salesman drowning in debt who accepts increasingly disturbing challenges in order to win $1 million. This movie's not going to be for everyone. There's a couple movies on this list that I'm going to say that for because I just know that some people are not going to like it. I mean, it is a remake of a Thai comedy, so some of it is a little bit humorous, but not necessarily effective in that. It's not a dark comedy by any means, but I think it's just a little bit of a cheesier choice on this list. But I personally really enjoy this movie. I've seen it a couple times, and it is highly, highly entertaining. There's gore in it, and it could be a little disturbing, but it's still a little more lighthearted than something like Green Room. Next up, we have The Ritual, which is a 2017 British supernatural horror based on the book by Adam Neville, where a group of friends reunite after one of the group passes away and decide to hike through the Scandinavian wilderness where they stumble upon an ancient evil. This movie is so good, so good, and I mean, if you're gonna watch any, I mean, there's a lot on this list that are really, really good, obviously. So if you're gonna watch any that you haven't seen yet though, The Ritual, the visuals in this movie are just so beautiful. I know it wasn't filmed in the Scandinavian wilderness, but the setting was gorgeous. And then when you see what's going on in the ending, oh my gosh. I loved the pacing of this movie. I liked the story development and the character development because these feel like real people, like they would all interact in this way, and I just think this is such a well done movie. Next up is probably the most recent movie on this list, and that is The Platform. It came out earlier this year. This is a Spanish sci-fi dystopian thriller based in a prison made up of vertical cells with a platform full of food being lowered to each level for exactly 2 minutes so the prisoners may eat. And then the prisoners are moved around every 30 days to different levels. This movie is very interesting and I think kind of polarizing. I know not everyone loved this movie because when I reviewed it, a lot of you guys said you didn't actually like it, which I found very surprising because I think this is such a unique movie. I love dystopian horror movies, or any kind of dystopian movies really, and so I think that's why I was so drawn to this story originally, but I think it actually was pretty effective. Is there a lot of horror in it? No, not really. It is described more as a thriller, so, you know, you could be a little nitpicky with the genres if you want, but yeah, it's not very scary. There's not too much horror at all, but the concept alone is so unique and so cool to me, and the way they developed the story I think was really good. Next up is a huge favorite among you guys. I know you talk about it every time I talk about it in the comments. As Above, So Below. This is a 2014 found footage movie following a documentary crew exploring what's underneath the Paris catacombs until they realize they're actually entering their own personal versions of hell. I think everyone knows about this movie by now. I finally bought it on DVD, guys. I'm very excited about it. This is such a good movie, and I think it doesn't get all the credit that it really deserves because, for one, it's a found footage movie, and that writes off a lot of people being interested in it. Also, the intro is very cheesy. I'm not a huge fan of the entire intro. The concept is cool and the visuals are kind of cool, but I don't know if I love the main actress in the beginning and like throughout. I don't know. There's something about it just I don't like. But beyond that, I think the visuals in this and the jump scares are actually really well done, but it's very popular by now, so I don't really need to convince you that it's good. The original Paranormal Activity from 2007 is on Netflix right now. I think it's the only one It's streaming on Netflix right now. This, of course, is a found footage movie that follows a couple haunted by a supernatural entity in their home, so they set up some security cameras to catch everything on film. So everyone knows what Paranormal Activity is by now. Watch it, don't watch it, I don't care. I love this movie, and I'm actually due for a rewatch of the entire franchise here soon for a nice little marathon. I think Paranormal Activity is really unique for its time and really changed the definition of what a found footage movie could be. I know that they kind of go into traditional found footage later on, but as far as like the first one and the second one, I think it was really creative and simple movies. You don't need to see a lot. Next up is Gerald's Game, which came out in 2017. This is a psychological thriller film and of course a Stephen King adaptation that follows a woman whose husband dies while she's handcuffed to the bed and begins seeing strange visions. This is directed by Mike Flanagan, who is amazing. I think they captured the essence of Stephen King very well in this movie, actually, and it was so well done and so well translated to movie. And of course this movie is very deeper than it appears to be on the surface, so I would definitely look into reading about it after you're done watching it, but it is a very, very good movie. Next up, another one of my favorites on this list, hands down, The Gift. Came out in 2015. This is a psychological thriller. There's a lot of psychological thrillers on this list, I'm sorry. This follows a couple who stumbles into a man from Simon's past who he doesn't immediately recognize, but after strange encounters and gifts with this man, they both slowly realize his intentions aren't as innocent as they seem. This movie, if you want disturbing, psychological, this is the one. If you have not seen this movie, just be prepared for this ending. Oh my god. It's very disturbing, I'm gonna say that, but in such a simple way that it's not so much. A lot of it is psychological, so it's not so in your face disturbing or anything like that. I think the buildup of the gradual awkwardness and discomfort that they're feeling around this man is so smooth and just believable. Oh my gosh, this movie is so good. Carrie, the original Carrie from 1976, is streaming on Netflix right now. This is, again, a Stephen King adaptation that follows Carrie White, who is withdrawn and bullied at her school. Along with a toxic relationship with her mother, she begins to realize she might have supernatural abilities. I think everyone's seen Carrie by now, or at least the remake. I think the remake personally is garbage. Can't stand it. Maybe that could be another movie that I revisit in the future and see if I like it the second time around, but as of right now I have no interest in rewatching that. But the original Carrie is of course a classic Stephen King story. I believe it was one of his first published novels and then was made into a movie 2 years after. Next up is The Witch, another A24 movie. This came out in 2015. It is set in the 17th century as a family begins suspecting their daughter of witchcraft after their infant son disappears while being watched by her. I mean, I think this is a pretty much a fan favorite when it comes to A24 horror movies amongst the horror community. I know some people that don't like this movie. I think it is much more of a slower burn, atmospheric type horror, and I think A24 does that really well with the building atmosphere and things like that. Sometimes it's the only thing going for it, such as The Lighthouse, sorry. But The Witch is obviously amazing. I think a lot of people know that by now, so give it a rewatch. It's on Netflix. Next is a horror comedy, so if you're looking for something a little bit different, this one would be a good one. It's called Murder Party and came out in 2007. This is set at Halloween time, which we're getting so close to, guys. This is also a movie done by Jeremy Saulnier that follows a man who gets a random invitation to a Halloween party when he realizes it's to celebrate his own murder. This is a really good horror comedy. I'm not really into dark comedies too much, even though I like a lot of them. It's just a lot of the times the comedy doesn't do it for me. I'm kind of picky. You guys know that. I've said that before. This one I think is actually pretty entertaining and good. I think also it's, you know, Halloween themed, so if you're looking for new Halloween movies to watch, especially right now because we're all getting in the spirit, right? It's almost fall. This would be a great one. Give a watch and let me know what you think about it. Next up is Sinister from 2012. This is a supernatural horror following a writer and his family as they move into a house where many murders took place, and after he finds the snuff films, he decides to try and solve the case. This is said to be a lot of people's most disturbing movie they've ever seen, and I don't know if it's because I've seen a lot worse out there. This is not that disturbing to me. This is like dipping your toes in the disturbing movie waters if you are kind of new to really disturbing stuff, but I don't think it's that messed up. I mean, I don't want to say too much if you haven't seen it yet because it's kind of messed up. The snuff films themselves, horrifying. Not saying they're not. The next one is another underrated movie that I've heard no one else talk about that I reviewed a little while back. It's called Await Further Instructions. It came out in 2018. This is a sci-fi alien horror movie that follows a family on Christmas when they discover strange orders broadcasting on their TV and a black substance covering the house. This is a very bizarre sci-fi horror that is actually really well done and is so simple. It's another one of those indie type movies where they keep it really simple but super effective. I think even if you didn't like sci-fi alien movies, this one is not over the top. It's not super sci-fi or anything. It's just the underlying theme is kind of alien-ish. But generally it focuses on the family within the house, them kind of turning on each other, not trusting each other. So it's more about that dynamic than the actual aliens or anything, because I don't even think you see an alien in this movie. But it's just enough sci-fi sprinkled in that I think is so creepy. So definitely watch it if you have not seen it yet. Next up we have Hush, which is a 2016 movie. Very famous movie. A lot of people talked about this when it came out. It's a home invasion movie following a deaf woman who retreated into the woods only to have to fight for her life. Also directed by Mike Flanagan. So I say all the time that I don't like home invasion movies, that they're my least favorite subgenre of horror, but there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, right? So this is one of those exceptions. I think the concept alone in this is really, really amazing and really scary versus just a normal break-in or home invasion movie. You know, the fact that she's deaf, it adds a layer of fear that we don't really comprehend, and I think just adds to the horror elements of this movie and the suspense. Next up we have another period piece in Apostle, which is a 2018 movie. This is set in early 20th century and follows a man searching for his sister who is being held captive by a religious cult. This is one of those movies that again is very polarizing, and I didn't know that it was polarizing until I reviewed this movie and talked about how it was one of my favorite horror movies of 2018, I believe. And a lot of people disagreed with me, and I was actually really surprised by this. So that being said, I think this is an underrated movie. I think the setting, again, is gorgeous. I love it, and the slow, gradual build to the reveal of everything is so cool. So I'm not sure why people hate it. If you hated it, please let me know why you did down below. I know some people didn't like the ending and didn't like where that went because it gets really weird and very not expected, which I love. I don't know. Next up is Chernobyl Diaries, which came out in 2012. This is written and produced by Oren Peli, who of course brought us Paranormal Activity. This follows a group of young tourists who travel to Pripyat, the site of the reactor explosion in Chernobyl, when they realize they're actually stranded in the radioactive town. So this is obviously a very controversial movie. It is a tad exploitive of the situation in Chernobyl, the explosion, and those who were affected by it. It's definitely exploitative of that. So it's not going to be for everyone. I just have a special place in my heart for this movie because I fell in love with it the first time I watched it, and it's just one of my comfort movies now. So I recognize that it is controversial of a movie to have ever been made in the first place, but it's still one of my favorite movies on this list and on Netflix. Also, I always thought this was found footage. Why did I include it in found footage lists? It's not a found footage movie, but it's shot kind of like that, which is so weird. Next up is Shudder, which is a 2004 Thai supernatural horror movie. This follows a couple who discover mysterious shadows in their photographs after killing a girl in a hit and run. So I don't remember much of the American remake, but I do remember it was definitely nowhere near as good as the original Thai Shudder. This movie is so good. I actually just rewatched it the other day, and I know it's a very 2000s movie, right? It's a very early 2000s horror movie. If you like movies like Ring You or The Grudge and you haven't seen Shudder yet, you will definitely love it. I think the horror elements in these movies are just so good. I'm very biased to kind of Asian horror takes because obviously The Ring is my favorite movie, and while that is an American movie, it the story originates in Japan. So I think Asian horror movies are some of the most effective types of horror, at least for me personally, especially when they do supernatural. They like specialize in that. So Shudder is no exception. This movie is so well done, and obviously, like I said, early 2000s. So if you're not a fan of that era, not sure if you'd love this movie, but I think it's well loved by a lot in the community. So next up we have another early 2000s movie of Session 9, which is a 2001 movie, so very early 2000s. This is more of an atmospheric horror that follows a team of asbestos removal workers hired to clean up an abandoned asylum. So I know hearing that, it kind of sounds like it would be cheesy. I think a lot of these movies can be very cheesy, and there was like this whole thing in the early 2000s kind of turned into a trope of like asylum stuff, right? But I don't think this one is actually that cheesy at all. I think it builds the tension really well between the characters, and it might sound kind of exploitative at first when you hear about it, but it's not at all actually. There's so much more to this movie that makes it kind of less than a horror movie. There's horror elements in it, but it's definitely more psychological. Next up is a movie that is definitely not going to be for everyone, so bear with me. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. This is a 2016 movie. This follows a woman hired to care for an elderly author when she begins to believe her house is actually haunted. So this is a gothic supernatural thriller and very atmospheric of a horror movie. In fact, that's pretty much the only thing it has going for it, along with beautiful writing. I think the movie in and of itself is much like a poem. Every word has a purpose, and every shot is very curated and selected and there for a reason. So it feels very prose-like. It's just a beautiful storytelling. It's not a lot happens, which is why a lot of people do not like this movie. It is a slow burn through the end, but the atmosphere and the way they tell the story is so beautiful. I'd say if you're into writing, or you're a writer, or you write poetry, I think you would really like this movie, which is a weird, you know, correlation, but it just works. I don't know. So next up is Emelie from 2015. This is one that I included in my original Netflix video. This follows a young babysitter who begins to take things a little bit too far with the children, and I think this is actually a really unique babysitter movie. I wouldn't normally recommend like a generic horror movie trope type movie. Actually, that's not true. I do that all the time. But babysitter movies, I think, have been done a lot, right? We all know this, but I think this is a really good take on the babysitter story. But like I said in my last Netflix video, this is not going to be the best movie on this list. But if you haven't seen it yet, it is entertaining, and it's more like, it's an easy to follow type horror movie, if you know what I mean. It's disturbing at times, but mostly it's kind of lighter than other movies that I've recommended that you have to like really pay attention to. Next up, Candyman, the original 1992 movie, is streaming on Netflix, which is how I watched it for the first time the other day. And I just talked about this in my last video, so we're not gonna spend too much time on this. I think Tony Todd in this movie is so incredible. I think he makes an amazing villain. Obviously, we've seen him in all the Final Destination movies as well, but he's clearly known for being the Candyman, and I'm actually really excited that he is still cast as Candyman in the remake. I think that was such a smart choice, and I'm so excited. So the last movie on Netflix that I'm going to recommend is Super Dark Times. This is a 2017 movie that is more of a psychological drama thriller that follows two friends after a serious incident and what transpires after. This is kind of like a coming of age type movie, and it is definitely a slower burn. I wouldn't even consider it horror, honestly. I talked about it when I reviewed it. Definitely not really a horror movie, more of a drama thriller, but it does get really dark and definitely has horror elements in it. It's again one of those movies that is a little bit more realistic, like it could actually happen, and more believable. So if you're more into the realism type horror, this isn't a horror, but this would be a good choice for you. So I know I'm definitely missing a lot of good movies on Netflix. So if you want to list your favorites that are streaming on there right now, horror or not, I love watching non-horror too all the time. Please leave them in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.